Welcome to the Kino Cave, and today we're back with the X-Men reviews, and today I'm going to talk about X-Men Days of Future Past. So, obligatory fuck Bryan Singer out of the way, you can watch my reviews for the first two X-Men movies. Yeah, none of my praise for this movie is directed at Bryan Singer, because look it up. So this was always one of my favorite X-Men movies growing up. Largely because it felt like the ultimate X-Men movie. It was almost like the Avengers Endgame of this franchise. It was crossing these worlds together and bringing everything together. I think pretty much every character up to that point who's been in an X-Men movie is in this one. And after watching it the other day, I pretty much continue to agree with that assessment that I made when I was a kid. I've seen a lot of back and forth on the internet of people talking about the X-Men movies and reassessing them, in the modern landscape of superhero media and all that kind of thing. So I was a bit apprehensive going back to this one, thinking, is this rose-tinted glasses? But honestly, I don't think it is. This is still a really enjoyable movie, very fun, and the acting is fantastic, and it's pretty well written as well. There's very little that I don't like about this film. Getting into the story, I really like the action scene at the beginning. There's not a whole lot of mutant action in this film, so I feel like putting it in at the start was kind of a way of giving it all to you before we go into this more subdued espionage kind of a story set in the 70s. It's just, here's all the mutant action scenes with all the powers. There's portals going, and you've got, I think his name is Bishop, and all these characters that are kind of known to the Days of Future Past story. My only other experience with the Days of Future Past story is in the X-Men animated series, so I've not read the comic book, although I really do want to. So, as an adaptation, I can't really judge this, but as compared to other adaptations, this handles it very differently, but I still think they throw in enough Easter eggs to appease the fans of that story. Since this is meant to be the X-Men movie, it's kind of okay that the other actors seem to have been kind of put to the wayside, because at the beginning we have Patrick Stewart, we have Ian McKellen, we have Halle Berry, and Bobby Drake, and all these characters from previous films, and they're not in it a lot. They don't really have much to do outside of maybe Professor X and Kitty Pryde. Like, I can't even remember if Storm had a speaking line, which is kind of unfortunate, but when most of this film is set in the 70s with the younger cast, it feels more like the older cast passing the torch on to the younger ones. I didn't really mind it as much. I minded it a lot in the older X-Men films when they were the focus of the film and still not really the focus of the film, but I didn't mind it at all here. It's just nice to see them, really. One thing that is a standout when it comes to the acting is Hugh Jackman, Michael Fassbender, and James McAvoy all together in one scene. They are some of my favourite actors of all time, so having the three of them acting across from each other in a handful of scenes is just really great to see. I absolutely love that scene on the plane when Eric and Charles are arguing with each other. I love every interaction that Jackman has with McAvoy and Fassbender. It's just absolutely fantastic stuff. Fortunately enough, Jennifer Lawrence hasn't given up quite just yet. She's still acting a little bit, and she hasn't gone away from the makeup chair too much yet. Although I feel like that's going to change very, very soon when it comes to these movies. I genuinely think one of the best acting pairs of today is Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy, or as I like to call them, Mick Bender. Credit to the Graham Norton Show for teaching me that. I love that word for them. But I genuinely think they are. They act across from each other so, so well. They did in First Class, and they are the highlights of the not-so-good later X-Men films like Dark Phoenix. Pretty much the only scenes I remember from Dark Phoenix are the ones with Eric and Charles interacting, because these actors are just so good together. I'd love to see them in another movie. Not necessarily an X-Men movie, just another movie in general where they get to play this kind of bromance kind of couple, or even just an actual couple. I think it'd be really cool to see them on screen together again, because they work so well off each other. Another word on the acting, I really like the scene between James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart when Charles goes into Wolverine's brain to get some advice from his older self. Again, just two absolutely fantastic actors, one of the older generation, one of the younger generation, basically one passing the torch to the other. I absolutely love that scene because both of them are just giving it their all. The acting really is, I think, the best part of this movie. They've got some fantastic stars, and even people who aren't so good in other movies are great in this. The acting is just top notch. It's some of the best acting in a superhero film. Moving on to the characters, I love the direction they took with Charles Xavier. It would have been very easy to make him just the kind of professor who knew everything and they have to go get Eric. The idea of making him this broken man, this broken, addicted man who just can't even function anymore as himself, and the idea that he has to pick himself back up and take on the teachings from his older self through Wolverine. I think it just comes together really, really well. I absolutely love Charles's journey in this film, and it was ballsy. It was really ballsy, I think, to make him this way, because everybody's expecting him by the end of First Class. Everybody's expecting him to be mini Patrick Stewart, but I really like this direction they took with him. Yes, the serum that makes his legs work is kind of silly, but it's a comic book movie. Like, of course, there's a serum that make your legs work, but then take away your superpowers. That's just that's just the way it goes in comic book films. Moving on to Eric Lenscher, Michael Fassbender hasn't missed a beat. I really like his character in this as well. I like how he's presented as becoming this villain that we know from the first two X-Men films, but then it's slowly stripped away and we realize that he's actually still kind of fighting for the more noble causes. He's just going about it in a very dark way, and obviously he's killing people, which is bad, but the idea that he like tried to save John F. Kennedy is, I'll get onto that, but the idea that he's actually still trying to help mutants, and again, that scene on the plane is absolutely fantastic when he's putting Charles down and realizing that while Eric may be doing questionable things, Charles is doing nothing, and that can be just as bad. There's not much with Wolverine's character in this. They tried their best, I think, but Wolverine is really kind of just a conduit for the film to happen, and he's the star at the center of it. But one thing that I really do like about his character is that in the scene when Mystique is about to kill Trask, Wolverine sees a young William Stryker and gets flashbacks, and he actually gets flashbacks to X-Men 2. When there's an over 10-year difference between these films, I think a lot of films, especially superhero films and stuff, a lot of them would not bother reminding the audience of these films from over 10 years ago, because the kids who watch those films are now older, and the new kids may not have seen them, or at least don't have this reverence for them. But I like that. I'm trying not to talk about the filmmaker specifically, but I like that the focus is still on these characters who were in those films from the beginning. The idea that he's reminded of Brian Cox's version of William Stryker, and he's still dealing with all this stuff. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed seeing that. They handled it really, really well, because it's a little bit fan servicey, but it doesn't feel like fan service because it just works so well in the character and the story. On that note, I love how this film bridges the older X-Men films like X1, 2, and Last Stand, and the new X-Men films, First Class, and then this one, Apocalypse, and all those ones. I like how it's bridging the old and the new, and it does it really, really well. I think they kind of hand it over really, really nicely, and you can tell that these actors are kind of getting tired of these roles. There's not much more of a direction for them to go, so the idea of starting fresh and new in the older timeline with these newer versions of the characters, I think it was a really smart move, and I love the respect that's paid to the older films in this film as they go into the new versions of them. Regardless of what you think about those newer films and how good they are. Taking this film isolated from that, if you just watched it in 2014, I would be absolutely jonesing for the new version of the X-Men and feeling like there was a nice catharsis for the older ones. Continuing on from that, on that note of bringing back the old and paying reverence to them, they like got back all the old X-Men for one last scene to show that in this new timeline they are all happy and they're all thriving basically, which they definitely weren't by the end of Last Stand. I like that Kitty Pryde is there and teaching and things like that, and they're all having a good time. I love that Kelsey Grammer came back as Beast. The makeup isn't that great, but it's one like it's a handful of frames. It's grand. The fact that they got him in to do it is absolutely brilliant. I loved that. And then getting James Marsden and Famke Janssen to come back for the little epilogue and see that they're both doing really well. I love all that. It feels like such a nice wrap up for these characters. It almost makes me happy that, spoilers for Deadpool and Wolverine in the next like 10 seconds, but it really makes me happy that they didn't come back in Deadpool and Wolverine, because now this is our lasting image of those characters. So when we're talking about X-Men, I feel like it's only right to talk about the themes that have been rampant throughout this franchise and throughout the X-Men in general, is the idea of, you know, the X-Men representing oppressed minorities, and not even just them, but just people who feel oppressed in general, or people who are different, that the rest of the world doesn't really understand them. And I think having it go back to the 70s, those parallels become ever present, because in the 70s there was obviously a lot of fear mongering when it comes to people who are different. And you can tell even in the first scene with Trask, when he's talking about how, well, if mutants can do this, what's stopping them from doing this? Or they can do this and they could do that. And it's all a bunch of like if, ands, and buts, but it sounds scary enough that people are listening. And then enough mutants are doing bad things that it's putting the fear of God into the Homo sapiens. So there's obviously a lot of parallels there of like people, you know, thinking that they're going to be infected by gay people and things like that, or people being immediately afraid of black people just because of the color of their skin, because they might do something that they are stereotypically known to do. I think it handles it really, really well, and I think the 70s setting really lends to that, and I really do enjoy that. And one thing that I really do like, it's the argument that Eric and Mystique make at the very end. Again, it's very thematically appropriate, even for more so for now than back in 2014 or 2015, where is it right to show mercy to these people? Is it right to have hope for the world? Because Eric obviously doesn't have any, so he just leans into it. He just says, you know what, if you're going to treat me this way, I'm going to be this way, and this is like a taste of my power, and we will end up destroying you whether you like it or not. Whereas Charles has hope that people and mutants can coexist, at least until people kind of become extinct and everybody evolves into being a mutant, because it seems that, you know, everybody seems to have the X gene, at least as shown in the future, because the Sentinels are killing people who would eventually have mutant kids. I love that Eric makes this argument of, well, may as well just do whatever we like, because there's no point in being nice to these people. And I think that that is an issue that is brought up a lot nowadays, on whether or not we should be forgiving of quote unquote bad people, or people who maybe have certain prejudices or something like that. I think it's an important discussion, and I think it's one that is brought in this film, at least allegorically. Of course, it might not be intended that way, it probably isn't, but that's how I read it, and I think it's a very interesting conversation to say, is it okay or is it right to have hope for the world that people can do better? So that's my thoughts on the story, characters, and themes. Going on to kind of more filmmaking stuff now. I love that John Ottman came back to do the score. I love his version of the X-Men theme, and I love how it plays over that opening credits, as you know, you're flying through all the X-shaped stuff. I miss opening credits, I don't know, I think they're pretty cool and they get you hyped up for the movie. I like the Wolverine suit in the future, but I actually think that the yellow and brown suit would have actually been a little better than this one. I think there's also like another like apocalypse suit for Wolverine, but I genuinely think if you had the yellow and brown, it would be perfect for this setting because it's kind of muted drab colors for a muted drab world, rather than it just kind of being like a flight suit with a bit of yellow and blue on it. I like when they go back to the 70s, everything kind of has this 70s look. There's kind of a lot of uses of yellows and browns and kind of this more hopeful idea because the 70s, it was a little darker than the 60s, but I still think the 70s kind of had this air of colour and flamboyance about it and a little bit more hopeful than, you know, nowadays or even in the future. I do like that this is also kind of shot like a 70s film. Like, there's certain shots that look very, very 1970s. They were kind of going for that. I would have liked if they had went even further for that. I always prefer to see stylistic stuff over the just safe, you know, flat medium shots. I'm always a fan of when a filmmaker or just a crew go for something stylistic rather than just taking the safe option and doing the shots that you're all going to expect anyway. Like, I recently watched Cosmopolis and I didn't love that film, but I thought it was shot really well because it's weird and uncomfortable. And it doesn't always have to be uncomfortable either. Like, the opening of Halloween Kills is shot like a 70s film, and I absolutely love that because the scene is set in the 70s. I would have liked if they leaned further into that in this film. Few little things. Hank's serum that gives the makeup department the day off is kind of dumb. Can't you just make him beast? Come on. I get it. Nicholas Hoult doesn't want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and sit in a makeup chair, but if you're not going to put the effort in, then what's the point? Like, you know, you're making a film. This is a creative endeavor. Sit in the chair and do your best. Like, Rebecca Romijn didn't complain. I'm just saying, and she had to vomit up blue all over Hugh Jackman. Quicksilver has I like Quicksilver, you know. I like making him like a brash, young kind of guy because he's like he's like a young adult in the film. And I think Evan Peters does a good job, but that wig. Oh, that wig. That is fixed to his head. It's like a Lego man thing. I'm developing a wig there because I watch too much Mr. Sunday movies, so I'm going to notice a lot of wigs. I do have a lot of thoughts on the super speed scene that is now kind of famous. The one from Apocalypse is more famous, but this is obviously the beginning of that type of thing where they play music and everything is slowed to a standstill and Quicksilver's like running around kind of doing just whatever. For one thing, it was done in Over the Hedge, like in the early 2000s, and kind of done better in Over the Hedge. But also, I think people still talk about it as like what an amazing, innovative thing, but it's kind of just whatever. And I think it's been done better in nearly every other piece of media that shows super speed, except maybe Justice League, because I think people only think of it as this innovative thing because there wasn't any live action super speed stuff in those, like, you know, back like 10 years ago. There's more of it now. I think The Flash came out the same year that this movie came out, and even The Flash has done this concept better. Regardless of whether you watch The Flash or not, I would highly recommend the episode Enter Flash Time, because that entire 40-minute episode does the same thing as the super speed scene in X-Men Days of Future Past, but does it way better, and it's really, really interesting. And yeah, I think super speed scenes have just gotten more interesting since, and it's kind of weird how people still kind of look back to this one and are like, oh my god, it was so amazing. Don't get me wrong, that scene is really, really good, and I enjoyed it, and I really like the song that plays over it. And the one in X-Men Apocalypse is really funny, and I really do like it, but it's just kind of strange that people talk about it as if it's like the best thing ever. I kind of like how Michael Fassbender tries to dress like Ian McKellen, because there's one scene on the plane where he's wearing a scarf, and I'm like, that's an Ian McKellen look. I'm gonna do a bit more research when I'm done recording this, but I think he's doing that throughout the whole film. He's trying to dress like how Ian McKellen would in the 70s, and I love that. I think that's great. Couple of little things. I like the design for the Sentinels in the 70s. In the future, it's kind of okay. They're kind of meant to look like Terminators, I guess. It makes sense when you consider that they like copy mutants' powers, which is not what they do in the comics as far as I know. In the comics, they're like giant robots that can destroy mutants and stuff like that. And I understand why they didn't go for the giant robot angle, because that would have been very difficult. But I do like the design in the 60s or in the 70s, because it does kind of harken back to the comic books with the kind of purple and the like yellow eyes and the silver face and stuff. And I like that they can fly. I like they have massive fans in their stomachs. It's really good. It's really funny. And just a little point, I like the metal detector joke that when Wolverine walks through the metal detector, it doesn't go off and he's really surprised because he hasn't had the adamantium thing yet. So I found that very funny. I like that. I like little things like that that kind of, make you think about the other movies and all that kind of stuff. It's a really well made joke. And that is my review of X-Men Days of Future Past. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you like the video if you liked it, and comment what you think of X-Men Days of Future Past. Let me know how this series is going for you, me reviewing all the X-Men movies. I plan to do it right up until the end of the year. Yeah, depending on how it goes, because I want to do pretty much all horror content in October, and I want to do all Christmas content in December. But hopefully I'll get it done. I have Apocalypse, Logan, Dark Phoenix, and New Mutants to do. 4 films. I should get that done before the end of the year. I hope so, because I kind of don't want to bleed into 2025 with this stuff. I want to pick a different thing to talk about in 2025. Because my brain is weird. I focus on one thing for like 2 weeks and I shift to a different thing, and that kind of goes like that. So I'm watching X-Men movies when I really want to play the Arkham games instead. Having to focus on X-Men every 2 weeks for an entire year, it's starting to take a toll. So I hope you enjoy it, because it's at the expense of my sanity. Anyway, subscribe if you want, and I've got some big news coming in the next videos, so look forward to that. Have a really great day.